All right, I didn't put my name on this. I just realized. Uh, well, some of you do. Some of you are too new to know me. Uh, okay, so I'm Kerry Handler. I used to teach here until about, I guess, a year and a half ago, when I retired, and they still suck me into things. And so I want to talk about, before I even start, as to why I'm doing this. I don't mean why I'm here when I should be out in Florida or somewhere. Or I mean why this particular topic and the way I'm approaching it and how I got interested in it, etc. So those of you that had me in class or whatever, I usually do introduce myself, so they probably knew that this is not my first career. It's a second career. I had a 30-year career as an engineer and a scientist and a mathematician and that kind of stuff. So obviously, if I stuck with it for 30 years, A, I liked it, B, it was successful, which allowed me to go into a second career when that stopped because the company was bought and I was given a golden parachute of saying, get out, and I was worth more leaving than I ever was working there, apparently. And instead of going back and getting another job in the same field, I somehow I bumped into sort of saying like, well, why don't I go into a helping profession? Which I actually tried when I was 30 years old, and after getting my PhD, I applied to med schools, and I was told at 32 I was too old to go to medical school. Literally, that's what the letter said. So that's illegal now, but it wasn't then. But I went back, after that 30-year career, I bumped into this. I lived in Monmouth County, and I sort of saw they had no such thing as an LPC license yet. The court was fighting for it. I mean, the counselors were fighting for it, but Jersey wasn't one of the states that approved one yet. But by the time I was done here, it was approved. And so I was like, same class as Dr. Jodry, and we went through the program together, graduated together, worked a fair amount together, and stuff like that. But when I started this program, the MS program, I had to take some classes in just to review it, because my last psychology class was over 30 years before that. And I said, oh, there must be a lot of new stuff. And there was a lot of new stuff, but it was still Freud. It was still, so 30 years later, it was still the same thing. And having the background that I had, which was all science, sort of my immediate thing was like, shouldn't I know more about how the brain works, given that I'm working on the output of the brain, which is the mind, as a counselor? And does it help you to sort of know a little bit, not a lot, of neurobiology and neuroscience? And I don't mean that I wanted to become a neuroscientist, okay? But I wanted to understand, does it help to sort of understand the brain? And at that time, none of the schools were giving neuroscience courses, none of the counseling schools, et cetera. And in fact, that's one of the things I did here, but just once, because I couldn't gather enough interest in it more than once. But I did give a neuroscience course here. But I got interested in it to sort of understand, not because I was interested in all the Latin words that were there in that thing, but because it just seemed natural to me to say, well, perhaps understanding it. And I couldn't understand why it wasn't happening. And basically, I realized it wasn't happening because the two disciplines can't talk to each other. Okay, that there is one school right now in the US where the counseling PhD and master's education is in the medical school, and that's Boston University, which is mind-boggling to me that there finally is one. Okay, that they sort of combined it, so instead of having it in the education department, which is in a lot of places, or whatever, is that they combine the two, and it isn't to sort of change the curriculum because they have to still get past K-CREP. So they got to have the curriculum they have, but it's to begin to have both people being able to talk to each other. Okay? Because as it turns out, there's a lot of new things that are happening in both fields. And it's a good idea that we can give them things that we want to understand, and they can give us stuff, if they can talk English, that we want to understand in terms of like, well, how does that help me as a counselor? Okay, and so I'm going to have some pictures up that look like horrendous to you probably from the perspective of it has words on it that like nobody wants to know, and it also, well, no great sort of diagrams or whatever, but ultimately one of the things I want hopefully transmit as I talk is a few treatment hints that might come from the idea that you understand the body and the brain a little bit, because basically I don't think by knowing neuroscience that I'm not in the thing of saying like, well, you can't really control anything. And in fact, what I'm trying to say is that what you really need to have happen in some of the cases at least, our mind has to control our brain. Okay? Meaning that we have to change the brain with our mind. Otherwise, the counseling isn't going to work. And so I'm sort of hoping that I can get that message across, that that's the idea here. It's not like some sort of reductionist idea that everything we do is just controlled by these little synapses and stuff like that that we have no power over. It's the other way around of trying to say that we can control at least some of the things that are going on in here. Okay, and if we can do that, we can eliminate some of the problems or help clients eliminate the problems. Okay, and it's sort of nice because all this integrated stuff that everybody's talking about, and integrated medicine and all that this is part of that. That's to say that those two things are not separated or separable for that matter. At least that's what I believe. Okay, so let's take a shot. I probably don't know how to use this. Okay, we're going to try something. Perception, okay? Oh, I should go back. I'm going too fast. So, not true. Probably too slow. So, perception, okay? Anybody has a good definition? How you what? How you what?
How you understand things.
How you, okay, good. We'll get back to that. That's good. That's about as close as we can get. But what we're going to talk about is, sorry?
Interpretation?
Right, interpretation, okay, getting closer. So that's the whole idea. So I want to, there was one back there. How your senses processing. Well, your senses, okay. I don't know what sense is. Huh? The five senses. Okay, how you process the information that the five senses give you. Okay. Close. Actually, we are going to talk about the senses, so that's good. What? Good. Subjective experience. Okay. What's that got to do with reality? No, I'm like, okay, you're laughing, but... No, it's a serious question. What is...
How you experience the world, your perception is your reality.
Exactly. Okay, good. She's been to one of these lectures. Your perception is your reality, meaning that each of us potentially has a different reality. Okay? So that the world that you're experiencing, that you're with, is not necessarily the world that he's experiencing, she is experiencing, etc., meaning that it's different. And so we're going to talk about why that happens. And in fact, to me, counseling is about changing minds and changing perception. Okay? It's not that we change perception, but somehow our clients have to find a way of changing their minds and changing their perception. Okay? So that's what we're going to talk about. Okay. So before I put that next one on, which I already did, that I shouldn't have, there's too much light in here, but hopefully it'll work, so this is a test. okay? And I'm going to ask you individual answers and stuff like that. But so this video is a test. Those of you that's seen this video, I want you to keep your mouth shut, okay? Because your perception might be somewhat different from the people who haven't seen this video, okay? Just to stay on topic. So, anybody seen this?
Yes.
Okay, there's a few. All right, so shut up. Okay. Oh, so how do I do this? I guess I have to do it here. Yeah, I have to click on the little thing. I can't just do it from here. Okay. All right, so let's listen. So the idea is, although they'll give you instructions, is there is a team in white sweaters and a team in dark sweaters. It's not exactly super clear, but it'll be clear enough. They're going to be throwing a basketball around, and the challenge here is to count the number of times the team in the white sweaters is passing the ball, okay? Somewhere between 10 and 20, let's say, okay? I'm even helping you. Okay, so watch carefully, and there'll be a free ticket to this the next time I talk if you get it right. I'm not talking again, though. All right, so, I forgot. I got to go back to this.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Okay, anybody count? What did you say? 13. Anybody has a different number? 12. Okay, how many people saw the bear in the middle of the place?
Well, I knew it was there because I saw it before.
Well, if you saw it, that's why I said, keep you quiet if you've seen it before. Did you see it before? No, okay, he didn't see it before, so I don't know what he did wrong. So,
He got the number wrong too, though.
oh, you got the number? Oh, okay.
I was worried about past 4 that are
So he wasn't watching carefully enough, right? So, okay, so you saw a blur. All right, so I'm going to put it back in the beginning just so you can see this.
This is an awareness test.
Okay, so we'll just watch it for like 20 seconds.
How many passes does the team in white make?
Okay, I put it back to the beginning. It's the same video. Okay, I'm not trying to cheat by showing a different video.
But
So what happened?
You know what's crazy? So I've seen this before, but I counted the passes and I still didn't see
You're still in. Well, the funny thing is, when I was preparing this and I found this video, a couple of times when I focused, saying, "Can I tell how many?" I didn't see the pair.
I didn't see it, and I knew it.
Right. So what's happening? Okay. Well, since we don't have a lot of time, I'll tell you. Okay. When we look at something, okay, or we have a visual experience, but it's true for the other senses too, is we generally have an expectation of, or we create one very quickly of what are we looking for. So here, I told you to look at the team in the white, and in fact, also to look at the basketball itself, which is like this small, compact thing, and you're following it. And the issue is that your senses, so in this case your eye, is only capable of so many things at the same time in terms of totally, sort of going through of saying like, what is in that picture, okay? And we'll talk about the visual experience in a few minutes as to why that's so complicated, okay? And that's a little bit partially where neuroscience comes in. But the bottom line is that we have an expectation of what we're looking for. And why is that? like what is that doing us any good? Like, what's the point of having an expectation? Why do we, when we're starting to go look at something, we don't just like constantly scan the entire area saying, hey, what's going on? We are primed, okay, to go look at it, or ultimately we become primed by our own interests and what we want to focus on. And so what happened here is we were primed by me in this case of saying, or the instructor on the thing, of saying like, count the number of times the basketball moves and look at the white team. And you actually didn't have anybody counted the black team also? I didn't think so. Okay, so you lost that one too, right? Like, I didn't even see the other ball. So it's very important to understand that when we observe, we have an experience, our perception is partially guided by what we expect, okay? So, and it's called priming. That's the jargon of people who experiment with this stuff. But the bottom line is that's what goes on. So that's what happened here. And so our perception is not, quote, reality, okay? That is an objective reality here. There were two teams, two balls being passed. One of them went 13 times. The other one, I have no idea. I could never count it. Yet we only saw one thing. So what we're experiencing is guided by what we were expecting to experience, okay? In some respects, not that we knew how many there were, although I did tell you it was between 10 and 15, which they don't tell you. But it's an issue, okay? So perception here, it's a good example of like what we're doing. So let's move on a little bit. Or we could, but it won't work. Not sure what's happening.
Did you see the moonwalking?
I wonder if I have to go to the end of it. No, we saw the moonwalking thing, so. This is crazy. Okay, I'm going to go out for a second. And we'll just manually go here and then go back to that. Okay, so here's like an official definition, and a lot of this was in your responses about what there is. Nietzsche is not my favorite philosopher. He was a Nazi. No, he wasn't, but he sort of supplied a lot of the ideas to him. But he did say there's no truth, only perspective, which is interesting. What it says is that for every person, the truth is what their perspective of the world is. Okay? And he knew nothing about Freud. So, but let's look at that. Perception is the process used to select, organize, interpret stimuli into a meaningful and coherent picture of the environment. Okay? Meaning we organize the stuff, the sense, somebody talked about the senses, we organize it. Okay? But then we also select, saying, I'm not interested in that, so it's never going to appear to me, even in my senses, my perception. And then we interpret the stimuli, meaning we organize our own reality and interpret it. Okay? So when a client comes in and says, I'm this, and this is what's problematic, is you have to sort of hold yourself back and saying, oh my God, I was in your situation, and that's not going to happen. I can understand how you can think that. Okay? That's not the way things work, obviously, and we know that in counseling, that we are told to sort of not sort of try to be in our client's world. But this is the reason, because perception is their perception. Okay? And so we have to do it. So we're going to go into this a little bit deeper, because to me, that sort of like underlies as to why I'm interested in the brain and saying how does it interfere or interact with it. So I'm going to have a sample case, which is probably familiar to a lot of you. Not this case, not Taylor. But let's talk about Taylor. So Taylor works out there and was recently promoted and was told by the boss to give talk to subordinates, peers, and to the boss. Okay? Taylor was excited, felt undeserving and worried about being able to do the job. But above that, petrified, like literally petrified about giving the talk. Okay? I don't know, when you walk into one of your classes where it's the first time and everybody's sitting out there like you're sitting, some of you may feel, maybe not as bad as Taylor, but in there. So here's 1 second I want you to do is close your eyes for a second and picture Taylor and sort of get a feel for what this person is. Okay, you got it? No yawning. So, Taylor, man or woman? Sorry, how many women? Okay, all the women raised their hands. So I can see that. You said a man? Yeah. Oh, okay. So he was okay, but there's the point. He was primed, right? He knew he's got somebody sitting two seats down from him whose name is Taylor, and so that's where his mind went. So he was primed. Those of you, rest of you, who was a woman, what made you think that? So why would Taylor be a woman?
I think I know more women named Taylor than men.
Okay, Taylor Swift, maybe. I don't know, but that would be priming, right? That would be priming. What about the idea of, first of all, being promoted, okay? I got a nod here. And then being afraid, saying I'm undeserving, etc., right? We have a society that sort of encourages that. Meaning, think about that you're not deserving when you get promoted if you're a female. Okay? Or how much harder it is for a female to, in fact, get promoted. And the right idea, if I was a boss, which I used to be, is my idea was if I could find a female who can do the job, that's the one I would pick, because chances are they had such a hard time getting to the position that they already were that they got to be outshining all the guys who are trying. Okay? So I didn't quite go that far, but pretty much. Okay, and so, potentially, so there's a lot of reasons in the environment why we think that way, okay? All right, so let me add a little bit more to this. Notice I'm using he on purpose. I knew that there would be a lot more people who think this was a she. So he was out, so I'm adding to it a little bit. So he was out for 2 days immediately after the promotion, complaining with a stomach pain and tiredness. Faking? Okay, maybe because of stress, right. But he did manage to come in for the talk and complete it, but felt that it was terrible and nobody approved. Okay, now that we know about priming, what happened? Okay, cartoon. New Yorker, this October. It was just perfect. I mean, I had the talk done, and I said, oh my God, I got to use this. Okay? What's happening? Right, so there's this one person that, is he disapproving?
Yeah, I was just miserable.
Okay, I'm only going to point to you because you're so good. So he's just miserable. Okay, that's a good one. Maybe he is disapproving, okay? But let's focus. What about the rest of the audience? They love it. Does she see them? Sorry that it's a she. I mean, even though I said he. But here, I didn't want to change the cartoon. I couldn't. So she doesn't see them. She doesn't see the bear. Okay? She sees the basketball and the people. Okay?
What if he was sad that she was done and they're all happy that she's done?
Who cares? No, I'm not joking, right? Because this is her reality. And that's the whole point, though, is she has no clue what's going on in these people's head. So she went in primed and thought about this, okay? And she doesn't really think, but like already in there. So how could this happen? Like, how come she doesn't see the rest of the people? For the same reason that we all couldn't see the bear. okay, because we wanted to see the basketball. Okay, she walks in and she is looking for disapproval. Okay, that doesn't mean she's going to find a person that disapproves, but she's going to find some reason to identify some visual sign in this case, or maybe not a visual sign, it could be some other sign like sound or whatever, but she is going to find that thing. So when your client comes in and said, nobody likes me, it's because they've constructed a picture. Remember, we said that perception is a construction, okay? That they constructed a picture which says nobody likes me, okay? And so that's what happened. It was pretty funny that the New Yorker had this magazine, picture. So let's now talk about this experience she's having, okay? She basically has the thing, so let's talk about how this happens. So the first step, this is the way an experience occurs to us, okay? And here are the components of it. So the first thing is what we call attention. That is, walks in, looks at the audience, and then decides what to attend to, okay? Or was primed to decide what to attend to, okay? And then decides whichever way, okay? And meaning that we cannot absorb everything that's in there. There is some 50 of you out here, and I can look, scan all of you, in which case I won't see any of you, meaning in detail, or I can get little bits of and focus on some people that I know in here by sight, even at the distance you're at. And if you're in the back of the room, I'm not wearing my distance glasses, so Matt, I don't see you. So that's the first thing. And what's the reason for that? It's the original reason for that, evolution-wise, it's a threat perception, meaning, is there something in here that's going to feel horrible or be horrible, or is the tiger going to eat me up, kind of thing, in the old days where it was just like some antelope out there. So that happens. There's this threat perception, and that may be conscious, or actually you might actually be unconscious of the threat. But normally in this case we were conscious, like there's that guy, he's got his arms like this and all that. So that's the way it is. So let's focus on that, and then we're going to talk about the other things, which is that we talked about. You recognize it, you sort of, it's called integration, but basically you have to decide, and so you have all these memories, and we'll talk about memories. Then you have to decide, well, what am I going to do about this? All right, so oops. Okay, I pushed the button on here. No. I know I was pushing the button, but I don't know what to do about it. Okay. Oh, that timed out. Okay, so I have to go faster with the slides, that's all. So, but that's not true. This wasn't on that long, so I pushed something. And then ultimately you execute, meaning that you come up with what am I going to do, and then you execute that action. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of this, not all of it. There really isn't time. But let's go back to the first one, which is that the first thing is the sensory input. So first of all, we got a whole bunch of senses, right? So Taylor is not just seeing that guy, but he's obviously ignoring the applause and laughter of the other people. Or what if the laughter was they were laughing at her, right? From her perspective. It wasn't an approval laughter. And so that would just be her, own, again, it's her interpretation and things like that would happen. So we're going through that. So let's think about this. Okay. So I said there would be some words up there, and you can ignore them or whatever. Is it just blurry to me? Probably. No, I'm just kidding. So it was the lunch. So you're getting something through your eyes, right? Which is, so what goes in through your eyes, by the way? Light. What's light? Physicists, anybody here? photons, right? So actually what comes through your eye is not a color, it's not a shape, it's a bunch of photons. That is, our retina is actually is sensitive to those photons. How fast they're moving, meaning like vibrating, because that's it's a wave basically. So, they're either in the red zone or the green zone or all those zones, okay? So it's sensitive to that, et cetera. So basically, it's sensitive to those things, okay? And that's what we get in. If you're hearing something, what's the physical thing that comes into your senses? Is it a sound or what? What'd you say? Sound wave? Where's that? Vibration of what? It's molecules vibrating in the air, right? It's the air vibration, which then hits like hair follicles in our ears, deep down, which then reproduces a sound. Okay, you don't have to know this, but the bottom line is that our brain is working so hard, okay, from the reality to turn it into what our mind looks at. I mean, this is the crazy picture for neuroscience and the mind, meaning that the most unsolvable problem in our profession right now, and it's considered to be the hardest problem, it's called that, is how, from a bunch of crap in our brains, firing and all this stuff and things, we see what we see in front of us. Okay? That's like incredible. Okay? Because of all the changes, and instantaneously, like not like 6 hours later like a computer would do. It's like, So that comes in. There's a switch point in the brain, okay? And if our attention is on that thing, and it goes to two places. And so some guy got a Nobel Prize for this. Okay, not this picture. But the speedy low road, it's called. So the low road and the high road. Actually, the guy wrote a book called Slow and Fast Thinking. Okay? And what it is saying like, all right, so the slow thinking is this. It's speedy. I'm sorry, that's the fast thinking. Is that it's speedy and it's not even really thinking. So that thing, that thalamus is a switch point for all our senses. It goes two places. One of it goes into our cortex, which is where we do all this work about what is this, have I ever seen it before, and all this other stuff. The other place sends it straight to a piece of the brain called the amygdala, and which I guess is not even labeled. Oh, there it is. It is. See, I was looking for something else, and so I didn't see it. No, just kidding. So it goes to that, and so let's think about this for just 1 second. Okay, how long it takes us to see something depends on how fast it's gotten into our brain. So that path to the amygdala, we'll talk about the next step from there, is just one thing, one shot like this. The path through the cortex is like way more time, okay? And so now we can discuss sort of like what happens. Okay, that's the high road. So I'm not going over this, but this will add a little bit more to it as to why the other thing is so slow, is that it turns out that there are 6 different parts of the visual cortex. And notice that some of them, they all only look at the shape, some of them look for motion, some of them look for color, etc. It's got to go through all that, and then we construct the picture that we want. Okay, so that then that picture is constructed, and then we see. So I think actually like a antelope can't really wait for all 6 of these things to kick in, okay? Because by that time the tiger has like taken care of that, okay? So the response of this evolutionary response for this was saying like, the first one of these, the quicker you can see it, send a signal to the amygdala, okay? So what happens is the amygdala gets the signal like this, okay? And that's the only reason I wanted to show this, that like, and each of our senses has a similar complex computational responsibility of saying like, what do I hear, what do I smell, what do I taste, what do I see, kind of thing. It's a complex kind of thing, okay? So it's sort of important to understand that it sort of works slowly. Okay, so here's a much easier picture of this. But what happens at the amygdala? If it compares it, it has a memory, and what it has a memory of is things that you're uncomfortable with, that you're scared of, and all those kinds of things, because it's a survival mechanism. And so it goes to the hypothalamus, which is just a control valve in your body, but these are you're probably more familiar with, the pituitary gland, the adrenal gland. That's your fight or flight syndrome. Okay, those things kick in, you have adrenaline, cortisol, all the good things in life, okay, running right through the body before your brain could ever say, what the hell was that? Okay? So that, because the thinking part of the brain is so much slower in this process. Okay, and so it's a shortcut because it's got very few synapses to go through. There's not that many connections, okay? So there is no decision made. Okay, so when that goes down, that antelope is not thinking, so how much bigger is that thing than mine? Is it still hungry? When did it have dinner and stuff like that? No, it's like out of there, okay? So in their case, humans are sort of different. We'll talk in 1 second. So here's what happens in your body, okay? And you are familiar. People said stress, right? So look at the stress. What happens? Inhibits digestive activity. Glucose is released. The whole purpose of this is send energy to your extremities so that you can run and punch the thing, okay? Shut down anything that's not necessary, okay? Immune system, nobody cares. I mean, that antelope doesn't care about their immune system at that point, right? Is because, like, no cold is going to bother them at that, if that tiger gets to them, so they run. Okay, so accelerates the heart, pump more blood into those things. What else? Dilates pupil to see what the heck's going on in much more detail. And anything that you see generates these things that essentially pump the system up for action. Relaxes so you can get in oxygen, that you don't hyperventilate because then you're not getting oxygen. And accelerates the heart, obviously, so we said that. So all of these things are going on. Okay, do you feel that?
Not now.
What do you mean, not now?
Not ever.
Oh, you mean not?
Well, I mean, if I was stressed and afraid, I wouldn't actually, it was like an automatic thing, wouldn't it be?
It's automatic, but you are going to feel your stomach, you're going to feel potentially your heart rate go up. Maybe temperature, like your hands sweating and those kinds of things. So there's a bunch of things, but you're right, you don't feel all of it. You might be hyperventilating, etc. So you are feeling it, okay? So there's one sense we didn't talk about for which that's important, and that's called proprioception. Anybody knows? Yes? Right. No, well, and it's also knowing what your body's feeling. Not just, right. It's where your body's in space, which is where the name came from, but then it's being used for all the internal, how you feel, pain, those other things, et cetera, are included in that. So that you actually feel it, and that goes back to your brain. So now you got one additional input. You see the tiger, et cetera, and you're feeling like crap, okay? So that adds to the negative impression of this, which now feeds back. So not only are you scared of giving a talk, but this thing essentially reinforces you have a good reason to be scared, that you must be really scared because your stomach is gurgling and all this other stuff. So that's a feedback that's essentially makes things worse occasionally. The other thing is, what happens long term if you have this? Like, let's say somebody, your client, was assaulted when they were really young. Yeah, it's sort of that you're basically, your adrenaline system is screwed up, because what you have here is what's called the positive feedback. Normally, the adrenaline system works is that when it reaches a certain level, it decreases itself and shuts down, etc. But this thing is on all the time. And that doesn't happen for the gazelle because, hey, that tiger is gone. I'm cool, okay? For us, what we got is we got our mind, okay? Which is saying, well, I have to give this talk again tomorrow maybe, or these people are all gonna hate me now every day I go into work, and all this other stuff. So we, through cognitively, can carry this problem with us, which an animal can't, okay? And because we carry it with us, what happens? Heart disease, right? Because you're constantly messing with because it does, inhibits digestive activity. So there's a lot of stress-related stomach illnesses, et cetera, that are occurring, right? That happens. The heart disease, because it's accelerated, so high blood pressure, et cetera, comes from this. Not all of it, but obviously, but it occurs. And infections, because the gazelle only shuts its immune system down for 30 seconds, and then by that time it has either run or killed, or got killed. A human can carry this forever, a long period of time. So the immune system being decreased creates a vulnerability to diseases. Okay, so it's got a lot of long-term kind of things. Treatment thoughts. So how does this help us? Knowing like how the brain works here to move the stuff, et cetera. So here are possible considerations, okay? This isn't amenable to counseling, the short-term kind of thing, okay? Because this thing is instantaneous. So you have your client, it's gonna take you time to figure out where the heck does this come from? Like, why do you feel like that, et cetera. That's gonna take at least 2 sessions, okay? I'm just kidding, it's gonna take a lot more. So, but the bottom line is they want immediate relief. And so we do have techniques for immediate relief, okay? Maybe tough, may not work, but it's worth a shot. Okay, so here's some of the things. I mean, certainly avoid the situation altogether, which she tried to do, right? Stayed home 2 days with the stomach upset. Okay, that avoided the situation, calmed the stomach upset down, went back in, got petrified. Okay, but it can potentially help. The other one is, hey, why is it happening? Because they have an expectation. So can you work on changing that expectation? Meaning know what you're walking into and potentially what you can do. So review the likely situation ahead of time and maybe create a different expectations. Change the picture. What could you do? Okay, now if you were doing this, what could you possibly do to do that, to sort of not have like that instant focus or that pride things?
Maybe like positive self-talk, like I'm going to do good, like say do something else.
Okay, you could try that, meaning try to work yourself out of this negative thing, right? So you could try that. 2 is, sorry?
Practice grounding still.
Yeah, mindfulness kind of stuff, right? So we're going to talk, that'll be certainly one of those kinds of things. Calming down your body ahead of time and trying to keeping them there, okay? The perceived stimulus. So if it is what we said it is, meaning it's that guy sitting there like this and scowling, okay, then maybe you can force them to say, okay, look at the back of the room. Don't look at anybody. Give the talk from outside the room. Give a video, okay, where you're talking, saying, I'm sorry I couldn't make it in, but here I am, okay? No, just try something inventive, potentially, of saying like, just avoid it until we can work this problem, okay? And so we talked about mindfulness. Try to take control as soon as possible. And also, you want them to pay attention to the physical ailments. Now, there's one other way this helps a client of sort of talking about what's happening to their body, is that it removes this guilt that there's something mentally wrong with me, okay? It basically places it on saying, it is your natural reaction. Your body is just sort of, on automatic, et cetera, and it's not your fault, okay? And that you can ultimately control this, and so that's what you do, okay? All right. So let's go back again. We're going to be talking about, so we got through the attention part, sort of, maybe. Let's talk about the next step, recognition and integration. So this is the idea of saying like, okay, I got through this part where I hardly had any role or any control. And we talked about that. But let's now talk about saying like, okay, what about the rest of it? That's sort of the slower road of saying like, how does that happen? Like I said before, it has to do with memories because, so the rest, we talked about sort of the unthinking part of the brain, which is, it hits the thalamus, which is the switch, it goes down and sort of loosens all these hormones, and then you're captive, okay? The other part is though still going on, the slow road. So what happens there is all that visual and other sensory information is going into the cortex, the part of your brain that solves problems and works things and does the recognition, et cetera. And so what does it try to do? It tries to figure out, saying like, have I been in this situation before? And what happened when I was in it? What did I do? How did I feel? And that kind of stuff. Obviously not answering questions like that, but that's what's contained in those memories. Okay, and so understanding that, how does that help us? Okay, so we're back to this. Now we're sort of on the high road, which is the slower part, and you can see that stimulus coming in, it goes to the frontal lobe, and I'm skipping over a lot of steps there, and we'll get to them in a second. But ultimately, what you want it to do is, every time one of these things is occurring, every experience, your frontal part of your brain is fighting with the amygdala for control of the hypothalamus, okay? Because if the frontal part of it saying like, boy, it's really stupid for me to get all this alarm, so it would shut it down. So what you're trying to achieve is to have your cortex shut down the amygdala so that the hypothalamus, so that it doesn't release all these hormones into your body. Okay, and that's sort of like the long-term goal of therapy. Not in those words, okay, but that's what you're trying to do. That it shouldn't be like, just because you're giving a talk, you shouldn't be alarmed, okay? So this is just another way of doing it. We talked about all this. So the only thing it shows, and this is like an extremely shortcut, sort of simplified picture, because it just says, oh, well, it's just the prefrontal and sensory cortices that we're talking about. But let's understand the memory, that stuff is like incredibly, that's like all our brain, basically. Every decision is dependent on that, et cetera. So let's talk about memory facts that might be important when we talk about memory. This is the stuff we like go into our mind for, we retrieve, like that exact picture, saying, what was it the last time when I gave a talk maybe? What did the audience look like? What does it remind me of, et cetera? So here are the different kinds of memory. So there is what's called implicit memory, which is simply, there isn't any control. There's two kinds. There's either motor learning, which is basically if you play golf, tennis, soccer, or in fact, if you sit in a chair, you're using implicit memory. You don't think about saying, well, how fast do I put my butt down? And when do I stop? Is it after I crash through the chair or before I do? Okay? So it's complex, right? Who has kids? Anybody? There's a few. Ever watch your kid learn how to sit on a chair? It's like they'll crash right through it because they have no idea that you're supposed to stop when it hits you, okay? So it takes them a while, but then once they do it, there's like no thought going in. Like when you said, when you drive, there's no thought. Like sometimes you look up saying, I don't understand how I got here, right? It's not because you lost directions, but it's like it's all on automatic. I mean, if you had to pay attention to every step during driving, you couldn't get from here to the entrance of the university.
Driving a stick shift.
Oh yeah, I know that. So it's like really, so habits are important. In fact, the brain tries to make everything a habit. And ta-da, the reaction to a crowded room where you have the experience previously that you're afraid of it is, I can shortcut that, right? I don't need to think about whether they really are angry at me or not angry at me. I'm just going to assume they're angry at me because I got to move on and think about the talk, do other stuff. And so it basically, potentially, that's a habit too. So it's a cognitive habit. It's not a skill, okay, where we sort of have the same reaction every time. So that's one kind of memory. The other kind of memory is, the interesting thing about implicit, by the way, is you can't recall it. You just do it, okay? Because if you try to recall every step, that means you're actually pulling it back and you'll screw it up. Okay, if you try to think about every time you swing a tennis racket saying like, am I supposed to turn my wrist? Am I supposed to do this? It's not going to work. So it definitely doesn't work. So it's not really recallable easily. The other kind of memory is explicit, which is essentially the memory we normally work with or called declarative. But semantic memory, which is just facts, well, we have fake facts, and no, I'm just kidding. So there's facts, and the other one is episodic, which is the events. Okay, kids, what kind of memory do they have? Under 5, under 4. Do they have a lot of episodic memory? If you ask a kid what happened when they were 4, no. Maybe a trauma kind of thing, but not a lot of it. So that's important to remember because kids basically only have implicit memories. Okay, so that means when we trace back, like when we start asking about history, etc., is we're not going to know a lot about explicit, episodic kind of things. And we'll come back to that if we have time. So those are things. But along with the actual things as to what happened, there's context, saying in what circumstance did this occur, and there are emotions. Okay, and we'll talk about exactly what emotions are, but we sort of know, right? I mean, as to what emotions are. Now here's one that neuroscience brings us, okay, that we normally don't know or don't think about, is that the sensory, so the areas where we get the incoming signal, they're also where the memory is stored. So when I reconstruct an event, the auditory remembrance of what goes on comes from the auditory cortex. Let me go on to that here. Okay, so this is your brain, not on anything, just. So this is the brain. So notice that. So that means the visual association area, that is the frontal lobe, actually has to reach out to the visual association area in order to get the visual part of what happened in that experience. Okay? It has to reach out to the auditory association area as to what happened in terms of sounds, etc. And then it has to reach out into the somatosensory association area in terms of what happened to movement. And what's not shown here is up in the frontal section is where emotions are. It's got to reach out there of saying where it is. Put it all together, okay, and ta-da, here's the experience. So there is no photographic memory. That's bull, okay? You can remember very well, potentially, but it's constructed. Every time you recall, it's constructed, okay? It has to construct it from all these pieces. So A, it takes time. B, there's room for error because it's so complex. All right, so that sort of comes from there. We talked about the reconstruction of all the places, and it's influenced by a lot of pieces of the brain. And then this consolidated and the reconsolidated. So consolidated is a neuroscience term for stored long term. Reconsolidated meaning store it again after you pulled it back, okay? So a key thing is that it's reconsolidated during sleep. So when you go to sleep, during REM sleep is when you consolidate your memories, meaning that that's where they begin to be stored for longer term, and that's where it occurs. So does that give you an idea for treatment? What is that? Don't let him sleep. No, it sounds like a joke, but this guy, psychiatrist, is that what you were going to say, Matt? Okay. So this guy, who's a psychiatrist, ran experiments with PTSD patients and didn't let them sleep until he treated them. After, if he could get to them, meaning he was there, the Red Cross called him, and he was there during when the trauma occurred, and he didn't let them sleep. Not one of them got PTSD, okay? Because they couldn't store the thing. And the more days occurred between the time of the trauma and he finished his treatment, the less, the PTSD started to sneak back in, because it turns out that it takes more than a day to really solidify. The way our nervous system works is what's called Hebb's law in neuroscience. I forget that. But what Hebb's law says is neurons that fire together wire together. Okay, so that means that this sequence of things that fire together, if they fire together several times, then they're going to wire together. And so then you get this something closer to an implicit memory, meaning that it's just going to go that way, that there's never a decision process in there. And so he basically, first of all, interrupted it, but the longer he waited, the more times they fired together, because each day the thing got reinforced more and more each night. Well, maybe they sleep during the day. But anyway, each time it got, the wiring started more and more. Okay, and that just solidified it. It makes it harder to treat. Okay, it's not that it's impossible or anything. There are good treatments for PTSD. But I said, we would work on seeing what to do. And this is one of the things. If you're working on trauma, the faster you can get to the person and have them, under treatment, the more chances of success. Okay, so there's something from neuroscience. Until I took that stuff, I had no idea. Freud talked about dreams, right? Dream interpretation. But these people don't remember their dreams. That's not the point. But Freud was right. It's a critical factor in trauma, in sort of anxiety and depression, et cetera, is that we have to be able to sort of get to that. Okay? The other piece, which I don't think it's on here, when you pull a memory back saying like, okay, so let me remember this, is it essentially comes back, it's in pieces, it's reconstructed. And remember I said that emotions are involved, that's part of a memory. So it comes back depending on the emotion you have in the context of the present moment, okay? When you store it back, that emotion can essentially replace, weaken, etc., the emotion that was in there. Okay, meaning that every time you recall a memory, you're giving some chance of messing it up, because you have to construct it. It gets deconstructed when it's put back, and it's just an uncertain process, and it can get interfered by different contexts, by what's on your mind at the time, by your emotions at the time. So this back and forth is not a solid kind of thing. Yeah? Right. 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 So the problem, there is this sort of struggle, okay? And in fact, the Red Cross, for example, went away maybe a couple of years ago from, no, it's more than that because it was around, I remember it was around Katrina, where they started to, like, not recommend anymore that you work with a client by having them talk about their thing because they were afraid that you are re-traumatizing the client, helping them be re-traumatized. Okay? Because they're going over that memory, and so in some respects, you're recreating it, and therefore now they're going to store it again in that way. And meanwhile, they're going to be really like upset by as they tell it in their narrative. So there's some sort of a trade-off that you have to figure out what's the best way of doing in terms of how you do that. Okay, so we went through this stuff, but now you can see as to why this thing is complex, and you can also see how the memories can be screwed up because they're everywhere, okay, and they're constructed, reconstructed, constructed, and you know, it's sort of like telephone, you know, that game that the kids play, and that's sort of like what's happening. Hey, Matt, signal me when I have 5 minutes or something. Because I have no idea, and I hate looking at my own watch when I see everybody else looking at their watch, but not me. 15? Okay, well, I'll finish half of it anyway. Okay, so let me talk about another one, which we haven't talked. So, all right, so we talked about what happens during the trauma and all this other stuff. Okay, we only talk about horrible things, so let's talk about like a good thing now, okay? So the good thing is the parasympathetic system, okay, which is like, well, we don't all go around with high blood pressure and, you know, unreliable immune systems and all this other sort of stuff. And we go through pretty difficult things in our lives, okay? Is it good for an example? Oh, what the heck, he's out, so he doesn't know how long I take. So, you probably guessed from my accent that I'm from Tennessee. No, I'm just kidding. Huh? Hungary. Okay, so I was born in Hungary. I came out during the Hungarian Revolution. During the revolution, my brother and I stood in line, okay, at a bakery. And while we were standing in like a pretty long line, so I'm reminded of that because Dr. Hall reminded me of it today. Because I was standing there at the dining room and said, "Aren't you going up there to eat?" And I said, and then even before I opened my mouth, she says, "Oh, you don't eat if you won't go up if there's a line for the food." And I said, "Yeah, it's uncomfortable." So we were standing on line, and 3 Russian tanks, came around the corner and blasted a building maybe 5 miles away. Okay, but it was the loud firing, etc. And I said, "Is bread worth it?" And so we left. Okay, so I that thing stood around me. On the other hand, I don't go through this now. I did then, but I don't go through that part. I calm myself. One of my solutions is I do not stand on long cashier lines at ShopRite. So, we sort of go through that. So I was able to calm this system down. So that's what we're talking about here. That system there, the parasympathetic, which is interesting that the sympathetic sort of messes up your insides, and the parasympathetic doesn't. It calms. So its thing is to undo everything that the other system did. It calms you down. So there is a guy named Stephen Porges, you don't have to remember him, who sort of came up with something called the polyvagal theory or system, whatever theory. And So there is a nerve that runs down the spine to every one of these things called the vagus, the vagal nerve. Okay? And its job is to say, hey, knock it off, everything is fine, etc. So what it does is it basically, if there is a real feeling of comfort and safety, the vagal nerve controls. I mean, that's the normal control, right? Because normally we feel okay. So the vagal nerve is the one that controls all these things under those conditions. So safety. So that's what we do, right? So that's one of the things we make sure when we do therapy is we provide safety, very Rogerian, right? Is that a feeling of saying, I'm okay and I'm safe. So that's sort of like what does it. And so that should remind us in this process of saying like, well, if you don't want all this stuff on the right, then figure out how to provide more of a positive sense of safety, of those kinds of things for your client. Talked about mindfulness, various things, whatever it takes. I went to the ecotherapy talk here from Dr. Delaney, otherwise known as Megan. But anyway, and a lot of that is like they go outside, they watch a sunset, they go various things, and it's to give a sense of safety to the person, of very positive kind of feelings. Okay, so the treatment thoughts out of that, and so we talked about possible treat before memory consolidation, create a safe, calm situation before reviewing the problematic experiences, meaning calm the body, don't get it ready to sort of blow up. And be careful, which is the thing about the Red Cross, is be careful about prompting very emotional experiences, meaning like figure out how to do that better, etc., so that that doesn't occur. The other one is this wiring, right? That the more it does, so if you're going to learn something, so how do we undo something? So the way we undo it is we introduce a new thing, saying like, well, when you're going home, you want to go faster. Instead of turning right automatically, you're going to have to turn left. Okay, so, hey, I can do that. And so I make the thing, and I turn left, saying, okay, that was cool. What's going to happen the next day when they didn't prompt us? We're going to turn right again, right. So the idea in our treatment is that we have to really get our client to practice any kind of changed response to things, okay? So that they, rewire, because the wiring for this new thing has to be stronger than the wiring for the old one, okay? So, and the old one was used a lot, and so now we have to like keep doing it until that becomes an automatic kind of thing so that they have more control over it. And the other one is really have to focus on emotions, because if we have a negative emotion going on and we're trying to, then, and a memory gets stored again from that experience, then we're basically storing a negative memory. And that would be unfortunate generally. So again, we have to focus on the emotions. So given that, here's a quick thing. What is it? It's our emotions are about the current state of our environment. Okay, that's why they're there, to sort of tell us how do we feel about the environment. So it's not really the state of the environment, is that the way we are, meaning that it's the environment processed through the body and the brain, okay, which is what we talked about. That's perception. So our emotions are really about our perceptions, not about the environment. It's our perception of the environment. Okay, and then we add cognitive labels to it, like I'm sad, I'm depressed, I'm scared, etc. And that sort of helps us to communicate about our emotions, and so that's important in counseling. But they also motivate very specific behaviors. If we're afraid of something, we're going to avoid it, right? I mean, that's our natural response, okay? If we're angry, we're going to be aggressive. Okay, I mean, that's just sort of like automatic kind of responses. If we're depressed, we're going to withdraw. potentially be very still. Okay, some animals actually play dead or in fact can die. So those are the kinds of things so emotions are motivators for behavior. Okay, and it's good to know so that that we sort of know why a person is doing it, like why Taylor wasn't showing up for work, because she was afraid, so she withdrew. Okay, and so we work with that emotion and understand it. So one more thing very quickly, he's probably going to kill me, but anyway. So I haven't talked about this yet, although we slowly did we basically focused on this, meaning what happened to release this behavior or create this situation. But as a counselor, what you really want to do is go back. Okay, you want to draw a timeline in your mind, or actually even better on paper, and think about it and say, okay, so how could this have come about? Because you are going to ask, and just about all your theories, right, whether it's psychoanalytic or cognitive or whatever, is they always talk about what happened. And basically that's the diathesis stress model of saying like, well, what's the vulnerability? Where did it come from? I mean, not everybody does that. So just really quickly. So we talked about this, development. So where are the places where development can really bug us? Okay? So here's some developmental influences. The prefrontal cortex, which is our decision-making capability, does not mature until 25. Freud ended his stage theory at 12. Okay? And there's all that stuff about adolescents, that like they're just terrible and all this other stuff. 25 is when you can reliably say he should know what he's doing, or her too. Okay? But at 15, at 20, not necessarily. So we have all this stuff about like they're crazy people. But the fact is that they take risks and all this other stuff, but there is a physical excuse for that. And so we have to take that into account, not that they should continue it, but I think we need to understand that they're vulnerable to it. I don't know how you handle telling that to a teenager, but the problem is you as a counselor, that would be helpful. Until age 4 and 5, they only have implicit memory, so basically more of their responses are fully automatic, okay, because there's not a lot of thinking going on. And certainly before language, they can't process stuff, okay? Language is sort of an indicator as to whether somebody can think through something. Okay, I mean, they can still think, but it's not the same. This other stuff is, anybody remember ACEs in your studies? Okay, so those occur very early in development. So ACEs is adverse childhood experience. And if you got 4 or more of those, divorce, separation, no food, certainly any kind of abuse and neglect, and all this stuff, you got 4 or more, your chances of suicide are 10 times. Okay? Your chances of heart disease are 5 to 8 times. So, as an adult, okay? So these are lifelong vulnerabilities that can occur. So what happens to a child is absolutely critical. And I'm talking about child like from birth to a month or 6 months at the most, but a few months kind of thing. That's when this is like most important. And so while you can't ask a client necessarily what happened when you were 6 months old, because we just said they have no memories, you can ask about their family and where were they and when did that occur and that kind of stuff. So, right now we got a lot of people potentially like they're coming to this country, like those kids that are being taken from their parents, okay, at like a really young age. They're not going to know what happened. Okay. You're not just saying hi, right? Okay. So they're not going to know what happened, but this is, when people started protesting and the ACA had articles about it, it's because of that it's like...
You don't think that stress affects them in any way?
I'm saying that for the rest of their lives, it's going to affect them. Right, they definitely get affected. Okay, short term and long term. No, right. They just won't remember why or what's going on, and so if a doctor asks, they're not going to be able to respond to that. But people will tell them. Okay, I mean, people will tell them, when you were young, the reason you weren't with us is. Okay, so it's not their own memory, it's their parents' memory that they're repeating potentially. But you can find out at least, or try to find out some things. When a kid is born, they only have two emotions, content and discontent. Okay? They don't have anything else because there's no label that they can use and explain, etc. And so, because they don't have the capacity for feeling it. And then they develop all those other emotions. And what goes on, if something creates discontent, at this early point in time, the implication that they have to a child is that saying, this happened to you, this happened to me. I mean, obviously they're not thinking that, but that's their assumption about the world for now. So they essentially, if they're not getting fed, they're going to assume there is no food here. If they're not getting support, they're going to assume this is an unsafe world. Not up here, meaning they're not thinking that way, but they're going to start acting that way. Okay? So this is really critical. And then finally, on that chart, it goes back further, pre-birth, is that obviously there could be genetic malfunctions, meaning like a mutation, et cetera, so we know that. But in addition to that, the pre-birth environment can create changes that will essentially change their genes in some respects. Not their genes, but the way their body acts. Because this is epigenetics. Okay, anybody knows what that is? You do in the back, that guy? Okay, so epigenetics is the environmental impact on our DNA. It's not the genes they're changing what's called the RNA, the messenger thing, and that will either turn on or turn off genes. Okay, so if there's something occurring in the environment, then the RNA will say, okay, like the way I can help this person is by creating something that works with that environment. Okay, and so they'll change the gene, turn on a gene that usually is not turned on, or turn off a gene that's usually turned on. So this is what I'm going to close with, an example of the Dutch hunger syndrome. Anybody knows? If you were in my class, you knew, but he knows it too. What is it?
Those who starved and those who didn't, the impact was shown even 2 generations later in terms of heart disease and maybe risk of cancer.
Potentially, yeah. Okay, so okay, a little bit broader is that this was during the end of the Second World War. The Germans took all the food from the Dutch on the border section. The moms who were in the second trimester during that time, their kids, when they were born, developed diabetes, heart disease, etc. after the war. So even when they were born. What? Potentially a mental illness. So why did that happen? That's epigenetic. What happened is the body's assumption that there's no food, so after the child is born, there's not going to be any food. Okay, because I said, if it happens here, it's hard to correct because there's like no ability to like think through what I should do. So what they did, and so after the war, that was all the food they ever wanted. Dutch have good food. So they had all that food, but their body became super efficient. Okay, it could live on a spoonful, basically. I mean, that's what happens when people go very hungry. Their body essentially, because the RNA fixes shuts off some things and turns on other stuff, is that they can go on with practically no food. The problem was it didn't adjust the other direction as quickly. because by that time they were born and they were older and genetic changes are more difficult. So they became seriously, ill with various diseases. So that's the epigenetic change, where an environmental change influences a bodily change, okay, which can be very bad or occasionally good. Okay, so that's what happens. That's why sometimes kids inherit some of those things that we talked about under stress, is because the environmental change, their parents were constantly abusing them, so those things were on, and so the assumption was, and so it changed the gene, or essentially turned these systems on all the time instead of the normal process, so it didn't have that good feedback. So it's really important to sort of understand what goes on in the body, to sort of go ahead and sort of adjust your treatment ideas and how you question, like what your approach is with your client, how you work with them, and all that kind of stuff. I'm done. I don't know, he has a fist out, so that's to me, so my perception is he's threatening me. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
And let us just present this certificate of appreciation to you, Dr. Handler.
Oh, thank you.
An expert, right? Brilliant. And we're really privileged to have his brain in this room and for him to share all of this knowledge, because I think that this is really unique information that many of us probably wouldn't be able to present on. So we're really happy to have Dr. Handler come out of retirement.
Thank you. Oh, this is the best part. I have to declare this on my income tax. Thank you.
And so if anyone has any bad experiences with me as a field placement director, you can blame Dr. Handler because he trained me.